folks, we've made it back again. We've survived the trenches and are here to give you what you want, at least as far as movie talk. So this is the August issue, I guess you could call it. And I, of course, am Jeff Gallashaw, and this is Unfinished Business. And I am Jeff Gallashaw again, sorry. And if you're trying to reach me online, I can be reached at UnfinishedB2 on Instagram, or you know all this. Anyway, we also are joined, of course, as always, by our co-host, Andre Joseph.
Hello, Andre Joseph, AJEPIX Productions. Follow me at AJEPYX on Twitter and Instagram. And of course, you can find out all about my film work at AJEPIXProductions.com.
And also, didn't you have something premiere recently?
Yes, so I shot a quarantine-based music video called Angelina. It's done by the artist Mylan Lazistan from his album The Never-Ending Summer. It features myself and an actress friend of mine, Kitty Pirelli. So it's a very touching type of dramatic music video setup that was masterfully edited by our Cinephiles partner in crime, Mr. Eric Coen. Shout out to him for putting it together. And you can see it right now on YouTube, and we're going to be trying to enter in festivals for it in the coming days.
Okay, see, that's good. Always keep working. So for the August issue, we're going to briefly discuss news, but ultimately by the end of the episode, we will have given you a review of not one, not two, but the whole Fear Street trilogy, because it's just rather difficult to talk about it one by one individually when it's such a group effort, and not to mention directed by the same person, all three films. So we'll just discuss all three films later. But first, let's get to news. So, Andre, what big news is there out there in the film world for all of us to discuss and know?
I believe it has to be the elephant in the room, and that is Scarlett Johansson, yes, Black Widow herself, is suing Disney over unpaid royalties related to the fact that Black Widow got released simultaneously through Disney Plus with their premiere access cost, and of course being released theatrically. And unfortunately, I don't know if I want to call it a bomb, but it definitely has not performed to the level of most Marvel films in the past.
Okay, I can see both sides on this thing. Of course, I don't want to side with the billionaires at Disney, but I will say when they most likely signed her for this movie and the contract, they didn't know the pandemic was coming, and I doubt that they were really planning on doing Disney Plus premieres if there wasn't a pandemic. I'm sure they'd rather just put it in theaters and make their money purely that way. But then again, they did, I don't know if the plan when Mulan came out was for it to be simultaneous, or was it always first thought of just to do theatrical, and then last minute they were like, hey, we need to put this movie out, so let's just do it through Disney Plus. So if they never plan on putting it out on Disney Plus, and because of the pandemic, I can see their point of view, but I can also understand her point of view of like kind of being gypped because she was promised certain incentives if it made a certain amount of money. And obviously more people are like, you know what? I'd rather just watch it at home. I'll pay the extra money. I don't know why. Well, I can understand certain people's reasons why, but I mean, a good amount still went to the theater and saw it, but it probably wasn't as big as it was going to be. But it also doesn't help that even though it was coming out and you saw it everywhere, it just didn't feel as hyped as other Marvel movies when they come out. You know, it just felt like, hey, yeah, Black Widow's coming, guys. See it or not, whatever. And whereas other films are like, you will die if you don't see this movie in theaters. So, because I find it interesting that they were like, hey, we're going to do this simultaneously, but for Luca, their new animated Pixar film, they're like, stay home.
Yeah, I'm just as split about this as you are, Jeff. I feel like Disney did their absolute best to hold back and try to get this movie out at a time when they could put it safely in the theaters. Because if you remember, it was supposed to be May of last year when it was supposed to hit. Mm-hmm. Then they put November, thinking maybe the pandemic might be over by then, and it wasn't. And then they pushed it, to April, and then eventually decided on July, figuring at that point everybody would be vaccinated, we'd be back to normal, and people would run out to see it. But at the same time, there should have been an arrangement, if they were going to go that route with Disney Plus, to just double the compensation for Scarlett. They did it for Quiet Place 2 over at Paramount. Obviously, they paid off Gal Gadot and Patty Jenkins with Wonder Woman 84, and probably the other Warner Brothers projects that are getting this release, like Suicide Squad this weekend. And that should have been some fair compensation for her in that regard, rather than kind of blindsiding her and not giving her due in terms of those back end profits. Now, the other issue you mentioned before about like the hype level, I mean, as a fan of Marvel, I've wanted a Black Widow movie for some time. I thought it was long overdue to do this. Mm-hmm. At the same time, though, I don't know if the simultaneous release would have made a difference or not, because I thought the movie was not the best, but not the worst Marvel movie. It just was like average enough to be passable to where I enjoyed it, but there was a middle section that was kind of lagging that I kind of was drifting off on. And there was no major bombshell, going off of Endgame and what we've seen on some of these Disney Plus shows. We're expecting a big giant twist, and instead it's just a straight up prequel with an ending, without spoiling anything for people who haven't seen it. It's just, well, you got to get Disney Plus to watch this. It's not really going to move the needle too much. It's just more of a passing of the torch. And that's a disappointment for me.
Well, maybe also it would have helped if it had come out in its original date, because by now we're like almost 3 series deep on Disney Plus. So it's like, oh, we've already moved on past this. And it's like, oh yeah, Black Widow. Oh yeah, I remember her. It would be sort of like, hey, remember Starsky and Hutch, the movie that came out? Let's make a spinoff now of Starsky. It's like, who's really excited for that right now? Unless you're really like, yeah, I haven't seen Ben Stiller on screen in a while. So yeah, we'll see how this is going to pan out. I mean, they're eventually going to have to make a deal, but I guess Scarlett Johansson won't be in too many Disney movies in the future.
I think it's getting ugly enough. I don't think she's going to come back unless she and Feige have a good enough relationship that if it does get worked out, maybe we'll see her again.
We'll see. And when is the next Disney or Marvel movie, Disney movie coming out?
Shang-Chi. That's in early September.
Okay,
so a couple of weeks from now.
Well, that'll be interesting. We'll see how that fares. Is that also getting a double release, I guess you could say?
I think that one's going to be only in theaters, but I could be wrong.
Okay, so hopefully, it makes that Marvel money. Any other news stories to discuss this week? Because I got nothing.
Well, we had the new trailer of Cobra Kai drop and a release date of December. No specific day, but we know it's coming very soon. And it showed more clips of the All Valley tournament, seeing the Miyagi-Do and Eagle Fang coming together and training together, and another brief tease of Terry Silver. And also, if you notice too, that Robbie Lawrence, he just got a haircut, and he kind of has a Mike Barnes resemblance. So setting him up to show up this season.
Oh man, I'm like, notice they did this after we put our Cobra Kai episode. Just saying. Obviously, I'm excited for the new season. And all these little hints, they're like, oh, maybe this will happen. And also, I guess the rumor is that they signed the actor who plays Miguel to play Blue Beetle in a movie or an upcoming film, I guess, once they get everything together. So, I mean, everything is going good over at the Cobra Kai. Or, what is it? Eagle Death Fang now?
Fang or
whatever it is. Any other news this week?
Yeah, so one of the Coen Brothers, they have their Macbeth movie coming out with Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand. It's supposed to premiere at, was it Tribeca?
Tribeca Film Fest.
Okay, so apparently now at least one of the brothers is talking about fully retiring, at least maybe just going and writing stage plays rather than doing movies. I didn't read the entire article, but I know they've been teasing it for some time because just the changes in the business and the kind of movies they're putting out are going mostly to like Netflix. And the Western that they did was a Netflix release. So I think they're just getting frustrated, like a lot of veterans are, that, the streaming platforms are the way to go, and the theatrical release of those type of Oscar-winning pictures is now starting to kind of become a little more narrow and a little more tight. And of course, these guys have always had their independent roots for decades. I don't think they're ready to conform anytime soon.
Well, I guess I could see it. I mean, realistically, I love the Coen Brothers and most of their movies, but it's like, where else are they going to go? They've done everything in foreseeable that they could do. They went independent, they went studio, and studios are letting them do, hey, whatever you want. If you bring in the big names, we'll let you. So if Ethan Coen would rather make more like dialogue stage productions, more power to him. And maybe Joel Coen will just be like, you know what, I only want to make films when I want to make them. And if that's the thing, I mean, because they've been pretty steady over the last few years. It hasn't really been like gaps where you're like, hey, when's the next Coen Brothers movie coming out? And like you said, a lot of veterans I could see not liking this, because even I was watching an indie film by Greg Araki. And, he was the head of the new queer cinema movement of like the late 90s, early 90s. And I was thinking, watching these movies, like, you could get them made independently still, but where would you play them? You have the few independent theaters left, but it's not like I couldn't see any streaming service really drooling to, buy any of these projects unless he had, a noticeable name in it, that they could sell it on. Maybe it would go on Netflix or, maybe even Amazon Prime or by some miracle Hulu, but most likely it would be buried if it didn't have, let's say, buzz for it coming out initially. And even that only goes so far, because this shows my age. I'm from a time when if you won a Sundance Film Festival or any film festival, that usually guaranteed your movie was going to make some money, at least in indie theaters.
Right.
And then, I don't know, after a while, it just didn't matter. It became less prestigious. So, I mean, for indie films, I'm glad there's still theaters out there. But I guess if I had come up at a time when I was used to my films at least playing in some theaters, at least the art house circuit, to now it's like, I got to hope a streaming service picks me up for me to really do any business. It would be very frustrating, or make me want to like look into other avenues, which is another reason why I feel like a lot of filmmakers might go more into television, because at least I can tell a full story. I have as much time as I want. And, even though it's going to go to a streaming, I don't have to worry about, I have to entertain the audience, but I don't have to give, the studio doesn't have to give me 50 million notes to appeal to such a wide audience that what originally brought me to this project in the first place, I have to wipe out.
Exactly.
So, in the hopes that I can sell more popcorn and toys to go with this film. And sorry if that was a tangent on that one little snooze.
Yeah, no, all good points.
But I mean, it just feels like the end. At certain points, it feels like an end of an era, because like all the people you could count on, it's like, oh well, they've kind of been pushed out of the business, because it's too frustrating, It's
Yeah,
like
the veterans are passing on, or they're just going into teaching, or just kind of scaling back. I mean, that's why Tarantino keeps talking about retiring, because he mentioned on Bill Maher, of all shows, that he doesn't want to be like Don Siegel, who in the 70s had like a succession of really great movies, and then you get to the end of his career with like that Bette Midler flick where he just wasn't that top-notch director anymore. He rather go out on top. I can't blame him for that, but I personally think he could still go if he really wanted to, because he draws a crowd no matter what he makes.
I agree, but I guess it's sort of like what I call the freaks and geeks theory. Whereas, they made 18 episodes, all solid. But one of the fears was why they also, if they would have gotten renewed for a second season, they were worried, would there have been that dud, where we're just filling in episodes because we have an order instead of like what we really felt is the necessary stories to tell. So I guess, if he feels like at 10, he's done. I mean, I wouldn't have minded 12 if we were going to go with numbers, but I just feel like maybe once you feel like you're done, maybe you should just be like, you know what? I don't feel creative. I don't feel that creative spark. Now I'm just doing it to keep working. But my thing with Tarantino was it never felt like that anyway, because he only makes his own films. Now, again, if he wanted to make, let's say, his Star Trek movie finally when he's in his 70s, then it would have been like, yeah, maybe you should have hung it up a little while ago. But, if you still have original stories to tell, and you're still at the top of your game, hey, why not? It's not like he listens to critics or anybody else anyway. So, any other stories, or shall we move into part 2 of the episode?
Let's move into part 2.
Okay, so in part 2, or the review part, we will be talking about Fear Street Trilogy. In 1994, its sequel, 1978, and its third, or the third in the trilogy, 1666. Wonder how they came up with that year. So, first and foremost, all 3 films are directed by director Leah Janiak, who had previously made or directed the film Honeymoon. Fear Street is basically, it's going to sound a little silly explaining it, but basically these serial killings are happening in this small town that's kind of a depressed small town. And it seems like, I guess, every a decade, it seems like there are all these serial killings of these killers, and then it calms down, and then it starts again. So this movie is about a girl and her brother and her friends who try to get to the bottom of this. I don't know why I'm acting like we're not going to give details away, but, I will say, first things first, soon as the movie starts with Maya Hawke, definitely heavy Scream vibes. And by killing off, I guess, kind of the most famous cast member in this film in the beginning. Also with, some references before some pop culture. I mean, come on, Pete Dalton. And the masked killer, and then it'd be like, it's my boyfriend. And, I should have said spoiler alerts for this movie. I surprisingly liked it because I thought this was going to be like Netflix's typical teen movies, only done horror-wise. But I have to say, this is a movie I could have seen going to theaters to watch. And, it has the good production values. It has good filmmaking. It has good acting. And it keeps with the horror trope of actually, I guess, having lesser known actors. So none of them are truly sacred. But I guess it also helps watching the film knowing there's going to be a sequel, because there's a lot of setup here of questions that are never answered that eventually get answered. So at least as far as the first film. And, I did not expect there to be a lesbian love story at the heart of this all. That came out of nowhere. I was just like, wow, I just thought it was going to be about friendship. Then it was like, oh, wow. I think it's also very inventive that you notice it in minor things. None of the parents except for one girl's are really shown throughout the film. Like, we always hear the main character and her brother talk about their father, but he's never shown. And, in all 3 of the films. I will admit I was already rooting for the home team at first because, nerdy, kind of heavy-set black kid. You know, I'm like, okay, you won me over. I'm rooting for him. And, you know, you have the nice, you know, bitchy but kind of sexy cheerleader best friend who he has a crush on. I would say the biggest shock and thing that made me love at least the first film, the violence. And, you know, I did not expect that in a teen film. I do not expect them to put somebody through kind of a shredder who's a teenager and isn't even an evil teenager in this film. And, you know, they actually acknowledged, oh my God, teenagers have sex. So that is what I have to say about the first film. How did you feel about the first movie?
Well, it took me a while to get around to it. Interestingly enough, saying that it feels like a theatrical film, I read up where apparently the movie was intended to be a Fox release. That they shot the entire trilogy a few years ago, and then when Fox got bought out by Disney, the production company just pulled the whole thing out, and then they cut their deal with Netflix to release all three films pretty much in a weekly sequential order. So I thought that was pretty interesting to find out. You know, when I first heard the title, I was thinking, is this the R.L. Stine Fear Street? And then when I found out, I was like, oh, okay, so I'm going into this thinking it's going to be like Goosebumps. It's just going to be, you know, like a straight up, you know, PG-13 R.L. Stine adaptation, you know, nothing too crazy, but, you know, like too scary for kids, but, you know, not too scary for adults. And oh my God, an R.L. Stine adaptation with foul language, rear-end nudity, and a whole lot of violence. I'm like, how much money did they give this guy to have them bring it down to that level, take it a teenage, you know, novella and turning it into like a real R-rated thing? So that kind of shocked me. Yeah, you know, I gotta say, I gotta appreciate the fact that it was in 1994 instead of doing the Stranger Things. We have to do the 1980s and have all the tropes. Here, you had a good soundtrack. You had the wardrobe was period correct. The attitude, the black kid that you mentioned was a really interesting character, and I like kind of like how you think he's going to get romantically involved with the cheerleader and how that kind of turns out. And yes, the lesbian angle was different and certainly done with good taste. It wasn't anything derogatory. And it definitely had its share of unexpected twists, you know, where you think it's going to be one killer, then it turns out to be much more of like a demon possessed type of deal with witches involved. And yeah, I mean, there's not too much. I think maybe one gripe that I have about it, who was using Instant Messenger in 1994? Because I know nobody who was using AOL until about 1996.
You're using the nostalgia thing. About they didn't have this in this time.
I gotta be a stickler. That's basically when I was growing up. You know, like I love the 80s, but the 90s was when I started becoming aware of shit.
Okay, so other than using instant messaging, you like the movie, though, I take it.
Yeah, I generally liked it, yeah.
Okay. Well, with part two, what I found interesting is at this point, it's obvious each film is going to take on its own like little genre of horror history. Like they're all slasher movies, but 1994 Scream. This one, even though still like a possessed killer, this is more obviously Friday the 13th inspired.
Right.
You know, even though, of course, yes, I know the Friday the 13th movies came out in the early 80s, and this is 1978. Hey, it got inspiration. But here's the thing, or I'll save it for when I'm talking about the third film. But with this one, it's kind of more of the same, except obviously like at a camp, and we're going to kill more kids in general. You know, of course, now we have this Stranger Things again link by having Sadie Sink play the lead in this one. But again, you know, there's plenty of sex, there's plenty of violence, there's some actual twist in this one, introducing new characters who are going to be important later. But you know, this one, I mean, I think after you've seen the first one and some favorite characters don't make it, I feel like with this second one, it's the same thing, but it does, when your favorite characters might get killed, you don't feel it in your, it doesn't hurt as much because it's like, well, that we knew that was probably going to happen, you know. Again, this one, again, not too many adults in it, so it's mainly teenagers as the main characters. Vicious violence. You know, like I said, it's pretty much more the same, but I will say I still like the first one better. And, you know, if I had to pick between the two. But I mean,
I think I'm the other way around. I think I like 1978 a little bit more than I like 1994.
Is it because of the instant messaging?
No, that's not the issue. I think 1978 doesn't hold back as much. It really, you know, like they have little kids getting killed, you know, and they have it where the violence, I think they kind of ramped it up compared to 1994. The twist at the end you don't see coming. You're thinking like the girl that they meet in 1994 is the older sister, and then it turns out no, you're thinking of somebody else entirely. And again, getting a little bit more deeper to the story, having these new characters that kind of fit the tropes of like a Friday the 13th or a Halloween type of picture. I mean, that to me, that those movies are really more of my taste as opposed to Scream. And I do like Scream. I like the original one, and I kind of like the second one too. But I grew up on Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street, and that's like, to me, what I gravitate to a little bit more than like the 90s stuff where everybody's trying to be cool with the witty dialogue and shit.
Okay, well, okay, this show's definitely difference of taste because I more grew up with these Friday the 13th movies, and I will honestly say I like the Scream movies more. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm a dialogue man, so I like the wittiness and the self-referential meta stuff. Like I said, I have no real problems with the second one. I just felt like more of the same, different time period, and you know, obviously more room to kill. So it's sort of like either a Friday the 13th movie knockoff or a Friday the 13th movie that was never made. You know, where we're actually killing not adults who look like teenagers. We're killing teenage characters, and one, and this is a casting choice. Also, it doesn't help when you cast the kid who got killed in the last Halloween movie playing almost the same type of character. I was like, as soon as I saw him, I'm like, oh, he's gonna get the worst of it, and I was right. So I was just like, oh man, you don't get typecast in that role. It's gonna be like every time I see him, I'm like, oh, know what's gonna happen here. And it brings us to the third film, which I'm glad tied everything up. Not my favorite out of the three.
I agree, 100%.
Because it doesn't really play like a film. It plays like an epilogue in the beginning, and then the second half is the sequel to the first film. And so it's like, okay, so you smash cut this together. I understand why, but it doesn't feel like a whole. And my thing with, and I guess this has to do with the trilogy, I understand why there's a third film, and obviously you couldn't put the second half as the ending of the first film because you don't know who's going to come back for the second if I've told you everything you need to know. But also, it doesn't help that I'm not big into period pieces, so it's like, okay, you're showing me this, you know, epilogue where I was like, thank God this wasn't the whole movie, because I was like, and I think that's what the filmmakers were kind of thinking too, because like, yeah, I don't know if teenagers want to sit through all this. You know, it didn't work for Ginger Snaps. It's not going to work here. So then they gave you that second half where finally the janitor character from the first film, you know, his character makes more sense now because he's going to do something. But the ultimate villain at the end made very little sense to me. Yeah. Because here's the other thing. Maybe I missed something. The spoiler alert. They escape through the tunnels. They go into this rich house, which is, I believe, the mayor's, not the deputy's house.
Yeah, it's the mayor.
And then they go out front. They see some random couple in a car. And then the guy drives and gets hit by a car. And it's not the mayor. So what the hell was all of that for? That made no sense to me. Maybe I'm missing something. But I was just like, what? And then the ending. I understand you guys want to make this into a franchise, but it's like, okay, we just did that. Let's just leave the book here. It's like no one's ever gonna find that again. I was like, this makes no, like, they dropped a lot of, that's where I feel like studio notes came in. So it's like, if this is a hit, let's make some more or leave possibilities. But also what you said was interesting, where you were saying that this was originally planned to hit theaters. I think it worked on a weekly basis because, again, usually when you're making the original, then it's like, oh, we got to set up the sequel and we got to film it. And then people might argue about, you know, oh, I want more money this time. I want script changes. Here, they had a trilogy. Everything was ready. But if you have to sit on it for a year, I believe, like, again, everybody would have loved 1978 if they went to see Fear Street in theaters originally. I don't know how they would have felt about 1666, though, if they had to wait another year to see, like, how it all ends. And it was like this kind of weird half-half movie, you know?
You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of putting Back to the Future and Back to the Future 3 out like 6 months apart. It's like all the hype was on the second movie going into the future. Nobody at the time, because there was no internet, knew that the third movie was going to come out and be in the Old West. So when they saw that, they were kind of like, really? This is what we're doing now? We're going way back into the past. And the third movie, as good as it is, it made less money. So I look at the 1666 angle. Why are they doing Quantum Leap? Why are they having the present day characters all of a sudden have to like jump into past characters to keep the story connected? I'd rather just have, like, again, new characters that may have some linkage to what's happening in 1994 and then go from there. But the Quantum Leap shit didn't work. It was boring. It was long. The ending was basically the Monster Squad and the third season of Stranger Things, trying to tie it all up and have the big battle in the mall. And yeah, the thing with the car at the end made no sense. It was just like, we're trying to like quickly tie it all together, but I'm just like bored to tears. And I'm like, okay, when is this thing going to be over? Maybe we should have just ended it at 1666 and then maybe just have like one more scene to kind of cap it off. Other than that, like, it just, that's where I think it lost its coherence.
Okay.
It's good. 78, like I said, I like it better. It kept the story kind of connected to understand what was going on back then. And then 1666, it was like, let's just throw shit into the kitchen sink and see if it works and do Quantum Leap. And it's like, no, I'm bored. What the hell is going on? So yeah, I was disappointed with 1666, and I don't think they should suddenly do like, I don't know, 2005 or go back to the 80s or go back to 60. Let's go back to like 1910. So stupid. I don't know.
Well, I can understand why they wanted to maybe use the same actors as like, oh, this is your equivalent back then. But you said since it had been filmed like years ago, I would say maybe if it was like a quarantine production, it's like, well, we're not hiring anybody outside, so we got to use the same people. But I also feel like maybe they use the same actors to keep the audience interested by saying, hey, that's such and such from that part. That's such and such from that part. Because they even had, you know, the little girls that they were babysitting in 1994 play minor roles in the third film. But I agree with what you said a little, because it was strange that then when we go to 1666, we're getting adult characters, you know, as like Miller, the evil or town beholders. And it's like, okay, but isn't that kind of a new actor who wasn't in the first two parts? So it's like, huh? And then it's like, oh, that's supposed to be, you know, oh, the sheriff and the mayor's great grandfather. Then why not have one of those actors play that role? It's like, now you decide to go outside casting? And also, I like that they, in 1666, they honor everybody who died in 1994. But I was like, for just seeing your, like, best friend slaughtered, you guys are pretty much over it pretty fast, you know? It was like, oh, I guess I'm ready to love again after, my cheerleader crush died.
You're doing the quantum leap thing. There's no culture shock of like 1994 kids in 1666. Kid that's used to be on AOL Instant Messenger is suddenly having like cut up pigs, and he's not freaked out by that. What is the logic here?
Oh man, and why is the janitor selling CD players out of his trunk?
Columbia House.
It was just like, are you kidding me here? Like, I know you guys want to include a scene with him, but got to be selling stuff out of the trunk of his car. When did this become Everybody Hates Chris?
That's a reference to MC Hammer when he started selling CDs out of his car.
Oh, gee. I'm just like, ultimately, I think Fear Street works. I think it's definitely something people should see, especially if they're a horror fan. And I think it kind of puts some modern horror films to shame, because I'm like, this is something I would want to see in a horror film versus some of these like Johnny Come Lately horror films where you're just like, oh, this is the same thing. Or you're going to do PG-13, so it's a bunch of jump scares but don't want to show us violence, and then try to use the creative decision. Imagine what The Room is like. This isn't an improv show. This is a horror film. Show me something other than, oh, there's a little bit of blood there. So
this opens up the door for like some R-rated Goosebumps movies.
Yes, because R.L. Stine is loving this success right now. He's like, I'm back again, which I wouldn't mind as long as it's no more of those Goosebump movies with Jack Black. I'll be happy.
Yeah, I agree now.
I'm like, hey, if they want to start making some of those episodes of Goosebumps, a little harder edged. Are you afraid of the dark? They have the reboot of that series. That's a little, more. It's not R-rated, but it's a little harder than it used to be.
Yeah.
And like they're not afraid to end with a unhappy ending. And so hopefully if this is the way horror, or particular teen horror, the avenue they're going, I'd rather this than the 20th Saw movie.
I'll say this: if Joe Dante is ever watching this, I will put in my hat for an R-rated Erie, Indiana movie, and I'll direct it myself. I love it.
I had to go for a really old reference that only a handful of people will recognize.
Watch the Disney Channel back in those days.
Hey, I watched it when it was still on NBC, okay? So, yes, I was an Erie, Indiana fan. I didn't watch it when it started having spin-offs and on, what was it, the Fox Family?
Yeah, that was the Canadian production. It sucked.
Yeah, I never watched that, but I did watch those originals, when you had Nikki Cox, first time I saw her in a movie or on a television show before Unhappily Ever After was that.
So the braces?
No, she was in the episode where he went to another dimension where there was like barely anybody, and there was the future him who was driving the ice cream truck. And
yes, that's right.
Yeah, she was in that episode. Okay. Yes, folks, that shows you how big geeks we are that we remember these things. Also, that was one of the first times I saw Danielle Harris outside of a Halloween movie.
That's the episode I'm thinking about, the one she was in.
Yes, where she inherited the personality of some daredevil kid, because I think she got one of his body parts because she was already sick and then he died, so she was on the waiting list, got his parts, but she was practically like him now.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I know way too much about these episodes and series. So anything else you have to say about the Fear Street trilogy?
I think it started well, but the 1666 angle, it didn't work for me.
I liked it. I thought it was a successful trilogy. I didn't love the last part. I can see why it was there, but I can't honestly tell them how they could have done the third part better, or to incorporate both things into the other two movies and make it satisfying. So I just look at the third movie almost like it's a DVD extra exclusive, like, hey, to tie everything up, watch this. And rather than, okay, we got a story, beginning, middle, end. And so, folks, take our advice. Definitely check out the first 2 parts. If you're a completist, go with the third. But, it's not going to hurt you to watch the third. And so, that ends this business for this week. But as you all know, we have plenty of business that is unfinished out there. Sorry, I messed up the line. But if you've watched this enough, you know how it ends. But I have to ask you, folks, what tasty morsel should I give you this week? Have you seen Cemetery Man? If not, why not? Because it's fucking awesome. Andre, what film would you like to tell the people to see?
Yes. Have you seen the documentary Val? If not, why not? Because it is fucking awesome.
Well, I have not seen it, but I will soon. And that ends this month's or this week's episode. See you next time, everybody.